Well guys, welcome to Omaha. I've made the pilgrimage over to the States with my friends Hamish and Tom, who you no doubt know from the Hamish Hodder YouTube channel and the Investing with Tom channel. We were really lucky to actually attend the 2022 Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholder meeting in person the other day, and it was an awesome experience. And I also just wanted to say quickly at the top of the video, a huge thank you to everybody that came up and said hello to us, that follows all of our channels. I'm very sorry if I wasn't able to talk to you at the end of the day. I completely lost my voice by the end of the day. As you can probably hear, my voice is absolutely shot, but it was still awesome to meet all of you guys. So thanks very much if you came up and said hello. It was fantastic to meet you all. But anyway, news, big news. Warren Buffett, wow. He has been sinking a lot of Berkshire's excess cash into the market in Q1, literally. The cash pile of Berkshire Hathaway dropped by about $40 billion across Q1. Started about $144 billion, and it dropped to just $103 billion by the end of Q1. And from the meeting, and also from Berkshire's Q1 filing, we know that there's at least 6 positions that Buffett has either bought or added to in the quarter. So let's start running through them. And probably the one that's been catching the most headlines, which is actually quite an interesting case, is that Buffett was buying, in Q1, he was buying into Activision Blizzard. So he bought about $4.7 billion worth of Activision stock, and that's to add to either Ted or Todd's pre-existing $1 billion position. And no, Buffett hasn't gone crazy here. He's not all of a sudden having a thing for video game companies. There's in fact a completely different reason as to why Buffett has decided to increase Berkshire's stake to 9.7% of the company.
But then on January, 17th or 18th, Microsoft announced they were going to buy Activision for $95 a share. Now, when they announced that, at that point, Activision becomes a different kind of security. It becomes what Charlie and I used to call, we call them workouts or something like that, and they become known as arbitrage. Well, they're not really arbitrage, but they're securities, they're those cases of common stock, whose value depends not on what the market price does, but whether a given corporate event occurs, an announced corporate event occurs.
So Buffett is not buying Activision Blizzard for the business itself. He's simply buying the stock in the hopes that the Microsoft acquisition does actually go through. Because if that does happen, if it goes through at $95 per share, then Buffett will profit the difference between that $95 per share figure and whatever the stock price was that he bought it at.
Microsoft wants to buy Activision, we'll say it. Well, they said at $95 a share. And they've got the money. On January, whatever it was, 17th, 18th, 19th, Microsoft announces it. The stock, which had been in the 60s, went up to the 81 or 2. And that looked like not a big enough spread to me for a few days. And then it settled back a little. So anyway, we now own 9.5% of Activision. And if we went over 10%, we would file a report. It is my purchases, not the manager who bought it some months ago. If the deal goes through, we make some money, and if the deal doesn't go through, who knows what happens.
So that's the story of Warren Buffett's roughly $4.7 billion investment in Activision Blizzard stock. He's just, betting on the fact that the acquisition will go through. Just a simple bet, really. From there, if we get on to the second buy of the quarter, this was a really sneaky one, which did go a little bit under the radar, and that is that he bought more Apple shares. Now, Buffett didn't spend any great length of time talking about this at the meeting itself, but he did mention it, so this is what he had to say.
And we actually bought a little more Apple in the first quarter, so we decided we wanted to own a greater interest. And on top of that, we knew that we would own an even greater interest if they kept buying in their shares.
So nothing really groundbreaking there, but 2 things we can probably take away from it is that Buffett is currently okay with Apple's current valuation, and no doubt he likes the buybacks too. But overall, I don't think there's anything to get too carried away with. For example, Berkshire's Apple stake was worth $161.2 billion at the end of Q4 and finished at $159.1 billion at the end of Q1. And across Q1, Apple stock actually fell 1.67%, which would have taken the $161.2 billion stake down to $158.5 billion anyway, which only leaves about a $600 million gap there to what the position was worth at the end of Q1. So in the grand scheme of things, nothing really big there. Just an interesting tidbit. But with that said, let's talk about the biggest investment that Warren Buffett made in Q1 of 2022, and that was in Chevron. This was interesting because it was a massive buy for Buffett, but it wasn't discussed even once during the shareholder meeting. But it's very interesting. So at the end of Q4 last year, Berkshire's position was worth $4.5 billion, but 3 months later, the position has now grown to a massive $25.9 billion. And have a look at this. During the Berkshire meeting, Buffett put up this really interesting slide which showed us exactly how much money he sank into the market during different time periods within Q1. As you can see, the lion's share of that money went into the market between February 21st and March 15th. So it's likely that a lot of that Chevron buying, because it's such a big position, a lot of that money went into Chevron during that very specific time period. And what's funny is that if you look at Chevron's stock price chart over that period of time, it looks pretty impressive. The stock rose about 20%. Wow, Buffett, amazing market timing. Congratulations, that's epic. But there's a little bit more to it than that because, for example, if you say that Buffett maybe put $15 billion of the roughly $20 billion Chevron investment over that time period, at the then market cap of Chevron, it would have bought him about 6% of the entire company. Now that works out to about 117 million shares. But if you look at the time period between February 21st and March 15th, that includes 17 trading days, which on average might mean that Buffett would have bought, average of 6.9 million shares per day. Well, interestingly, before this time period, the average daily volume for Chevron was about 10 to 12 million shares. So when Buffett comes in with an extra 6.9 million shares per day, that's going to raise the daily volume of Chevron quite substantially, which definitely would have helped the stock price come up a little bit. Now, it's not all Berkshire because, of course, Chevron did also put out their annual report during this time as well, which definitely would have seen an increase in the trading volume. But it's interesting that definitely Berkshire would have had a hand in making the Chevron stock price rise over that specific period of time. But anyway, no doubt Buffett is certainly liking the US oil and gas companies at the present time because beyond Chevron, another stock that he bought in Q1 was actually Occidental Petroleum. And what I found really interesting about Buffett's discussion of the Occidental Petroleum buy during the Berkshire meeting is that he was essentially able to buy 14% of the company in just 2 weeks. But that's on top of about 40% of the company's shares being held off limits. And the reason for this, as we're about to hear, is the stock market's recent trend towards increasing amounts of speculation and essentially gambling in the short term, which increases the daily trading volumes.
That shows how we bought 14% of Occidental Petroleum. And you'll say, well, how can you buy 14% of a company in 2 weeks? And it's more extreme than that. Because if you look at the Occidental proxy, you'll see the standard names, index funds. They own 40% of the company, roughly. And they didn't do anything during this period. So now you're down to 60% of the Occidental Petroleum Company that's even available for sale. And I go in and tell Mark Millard, this fellow that is 30 feet away from Mearsau, and I say in the morning to him, buy 20% and take blocks or whatever it may be. And in 2 weeks, he buys 14% out of 60%. That's not investment. People were buying and selling like 3-day calls or 2-day calls. And the more times people pull the handle on the machine, the more money the machine makes. I mean, it's very clear. And overwhelmingly, where did people go? The investors just were sitting around, and there weren't very many, and the money was being made essentially by a bunch of people gambling on things. And it defies anything that Charlie and I have seen, and we've seen a lot, but I've never seen that percentage of the American public. Essentially, it was a gambling parlor.
So in a weird way, Berkshire actually has to thank the traders and the speculators that have swarmed the market over the past couple of years, which increase the daily trading volumes, which enable a big business like Berkshire to still make a sizable investment in a company like Occidental Petroleum in still the space of like 2 weeks. It's pretty insane. So that's the update for Warren Buffett's Occidental Petroleum position. And now if we move on to the next stock that he bought during the quarter, it was HP. So Buffett bought about $4.2 billion worth of HP shares during the quarter, but unfortunately he just didn't discuss this one at all during the Berkshire meeting. However, if you look at HP, it might be a very simple investment by Warren Buffett because HP, it's a large established company, but at the moment it's very cheap. It's trading at a P of about 6.5, but at the same time as being very cheap, the management is very focused at the moment on buying back a lot of their shares, which of course we know Warren Buffett loves. So I think over the past 4 quarters, HP has bought back about $1.5 billion worth of stock in every single quarter. So it's probably not the most in-depth or crazy in detail, complicated investment that Buffett has ever made. It probably just makes pretty good sense on paper. So that's why he's decided to pull the trigger, but still nothing huge. 4.2 billion. I know that's crazy saying 4.2 billion is nothing huge, but in Berkshire's case, it is nothing huge. But anyway, that leads us on to the last stock that we know that Buffett was buying in Q1. And that was Allegheny, so an insurance company, so right up Warren Buffett's alley. Now this one we already knew about. Berkshire announced that they were going to acquire Allegheny for $11.6 billion a little while back, but I wanted to still include it in this video because Warren Buffett really opened up on how that acquisition came about at the Berkshire shareholder meeting. So let's have a listen.
February 25th, I got a email, just a few lines long, from a fellow that was a friend of mine that worked for Berkshire many years ago. And he said he'd now become CEO of Allegheny Corp. I'd been following Allegheny Corp for 60 years. I'd read their annual reports. I had 4 big file drawers full of it because it was an interesting company. And so Joe said, this is my first annual report as CEO, and I just wanted to send it along to you. And I sent a note back to Joe, and I said, I'm going to read it. I look forward to reading it. And I said, by the way, I'm going to be in New York on March 7th, and when we get together, I'd like to see you. So that's the orderly and decision-making progress. I didn't call up investment bankers and say, will you prepare me a report on this, and what's your advice and all this stuff. I knew we'd buy Allegheny at the price we offered, and if it was of interest to Allegheny, fine. If it wasn't. But otherwise, if that email hadn't been sent, we would not have made an offer for Allegheny.
So that is the story of how Buffett ended up acquiring or is set to acquire Allegheny. Hasn't actually happened yet. But with that said, guys, they are the 6 stocks that we definitely know Warren Buffett was buying in Q1 of 2022. Now, of course, yes, we do have to wait until the 13F filing, which is a couple of weeks away, to actually get the full picture, perfectly presented, laid out in front of us. But I still think that it was pretty interesting that from all the different tidbits, we can still compile a pretty complete list of all the moves that Warren Buffett was making in Q1. So anyway, guys, thanks very much for watching. Leave a like on the video if you did enjoy it. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more. You can check out additional links to all the other stuff that I do down in the description of this video. But guys, that will just about do us for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
This video is brought to you by ShareSite. Sick of tracking your performance manually? Track capital gains, dividends, and currency fluctuations easily, and when it comes to tax time, have everything you need ready to go with just a click of a button. Try ShareSite for free or use the referral link in the description to get 4 months free when you sign up to an annual plan.